Have you ever have you ever offered to do something massive for someone? I mean, it's something that just takes a tremendous amount of time, resources, and energy.
It's like a huge favor that you really have to gear yourself up for.
Exactly. Imagine you offer to physically build a friend a house. You draw out the blueprints, you secure the funding, you psych yourself up for this grand, sweeping gesture.
You're fully expecting them to just be absolutely blown away by your generosity.
Right. But instead of saying thank you, they completely flip the script. I mean, they
Right.
turn it right around, look you in the eye and say, no, absolutely not. In fact, I am going to build an entire estate for you, and your great-great-grandchildren are going to live in it forever.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
Right. Just sit with that for a second. The absolute psychological whiplash of that moment. You
Right.
go in trying to be the benefactor, trying to be the one holding the cards in the relationship, and you suddenly find yourself on the receiving end of something so, like, disproportionately massive.
It completely shatters your entire understanding of the dynamic. It strips away any illusion of control you thought you had.
Yeah, totally.
You walk into the room thinking you are the patron, and you walk out realizing you are entirely the beneficiary. It is a profound emotional pivot.
And it completely reorients your place in the universe. And really, that specific feeling of total reversal is where we are starting today. We are taking a deep dive into an ancient conversation that did exactly that.
And it just so happens to be one of the most critical turning points in human history.
Exactly. So today, we are spending our time unpacking a theological document by Chris R. Velasquez. It's titled The Davidic Covenant, God Promises an Eternal Throne. And we're looking at that alongside this incredibly detailed infographic that visually maps out the timeline.
It really shows the sheer weight of this one specific event.
Yeah. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore an encounter recorded in the biblical text of 2 Samuel 7. We are looking at why a 3,000-year-old promise made to a shepherd-turned-king is far more than just some dusty political treaty.
It's a major hinge in the entire story of redemption.
Right. And by the time we wrap up, we'll see how this single ancient conversation completely frames the way you should view authority, the way you practice patience in your own life, and where you anchor your ultimate hope.
Because when we approach a text like 2 Samuel 7, I mean, the temptation is to read it as a self-contained anecdote. Just a nice little story about a king and his deity.
Like an isolated historical footnote.
Exactly. But if we pull back the lens, the biblical narrative is a highly unified, cohesive drama. It moves from creation to the fall, through the establishment of early covenants, into the messy history of redemption.
The tragedy of exile.
Right, and ultimately toward a cosmic restoration. This specific conversation gathers up all the longings humanity has ever had for righteous rule.
That desperate desire for a leader who actually does what is right without, being corrupted by power.
Exactly.
Right.
And it presses all of those longings forward toward an ultimate conclusion.
So to really feel the weight of this, we have to understand where David is sitting when this conversation even happens. If you know a bit of the background, you know David didn't exactly have an easy path to the throne.
No, not at all.
He spent years living as a fugitive, right? Hiding in caves, fighting civil wars, dodging spears thrown by his predecessor, King Saul.
It was a brutal, brutal rise to power.
But in 2 Samuel 7, the dust has finally settled. He's united the fractured tribes of Israel, he has secured the borders against the Philistines, and he's sitting in a brand new, incredibly luxurious palace.
Made of imported cedar wood.
Right, which is a huge deal.
It's a massive socio-political statement. In the ancient Near East, cedar from Lebanon was like the ultimate luxury building material. By living in a house of cedar, David is signaling to the surrounding nations that Israel is no longer just this ragtag group of hill country tribes.
They've arrived.
They have arrived on the international stage. But there is a glaring juxtaposition that begins to really eat at David. He has brought the Ark of the Covenant, which is the visible, sacred symbol of God's presence, into his new capital city of Jerusalem.
But while David is sleeping surrounded by expensive imported timber, the ark is sitting outside in a fabric tent.
Right.
It's the tabernacle, which is essentially the same nomadic structure they had been lugging around since they were wandering in the desert centuries ago. You can completely understand David's discomfort here.
It feels deeply inappropriate to him.
Yeah, so his instinct is to play the good ancient king. He decides, I am going to build God a temple, a permanent, glorious structure of stone and wood. And honestly, in that era, that is exactly what a newly established king was supposed to do, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was the standard political playbook. If you conquered your enemies and established your dynasty, you built a massive temple for your patron deity to solidify your reign.
Like an architectural thank you note.
Exactly. It was a way of saying the gods favor my administration. And David's spiritual advisor, the prophet Nathan, initially thinks it's a brilliant idea.
He tells David to just go ahead and do whatever is in his heart.
Yeah, because it seems so obviously pious that Nathan doesn't even stop to ask God about it.
But then we get the divine pivot.
Yeah.
That night, God interrupts Nathan and completely redirects the narrative.
That's
God basically says, go tell David to put down the hammer. He is not building me a house.
Which is such a striking rejection.
It really is. And right here is where Velazquez's paper zeroes in on something fascinating. We have to look at the language being used, specifically the Hebrew word for house.
Right. The word is bait.
Bayit. And in English, when we say house, we usually just mean real estate, bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
But this word is doing some serious heavy lifting in this conversation.
It is the absolute core of the passage's rhetorical brilliance. The author of Samuel is employing a profound play on words here. When David uses the word bait, he means a physical building, an architectural structure.
A temple.
Right. But when God responds, he uses the exact same word to mean something entirely different. God says, I will make you a bait, meaning a dynasty, a royal line, a lasting family legacy.
Oh, wow.
God is effectively saying, you want to build a house of stone for me. No, I am going to build a house of flesh and blood for you.
The response doesn't just reject the architectural project, it completely eclipses it. It's the mansion for a cup of coffee scenario we talked about earlier, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
David is offering a temporal building that will eventually decay or be destroyed, and God counters with an offer of an enduring dynasty. What strikes me is David's reaction.
Right. How does he process that?
I mean, if I offer to buy someone a latte and they hand me the keys to an estate, I'm probably going to have a panic attack, or at the very least, start feeling incredibly arrogant. How does an ancient king, a guy with an ego large enough to unite a nation, respond to being outgiven by God to this degree?
You might expect him to take it as a divine endorsement of his own greatness, honestly. He could have walked out to his balcony and told the people, look at how much God loves me because of everything I've accomplished.
Which is what a lot of ancient kings would do.
Absolutely. But instead, the text shows David going into the tent, sitting down before the Lord, and just stopping everything. His response is characterized by awe, astonishment, and deep humility.
He just sits in the tension of the unearned gift.
Precisely. He prays, who am I, O Lord God, and what is my house that you have brought me thus far? The analysis in our material actually calls this covenant maturity.
Covenant maturity. I like that phrase.
It's fitting because David instantly recognizes that this sweeping promise has absolutely nothing to do with his own military or political merit. It is entirely rooted in God's unprompted goodness.
And he doesn't treat it as an entitlement.
No. More importantly, David understands that this dynasty isn't for his own private privilege. It is a vehicle. He asks God to fulfill the promise specifically so that God's name is magnified forever, not his own.
That feels like a massive gut check for anyone listening today. When sudden success or, unearned grace falls into your lap, what is your immediate reflex?
Is it to leverage it to build your own personal brand?
Right. Or is it to sit in awe and recognize that you are a beneficiary of something much larger than yourself? David passes that character test beautifully in this moment.
He really does.
But I want to dig into the actual mechanics of what God is offering here. When Nathan goes back to David with this oracle, he doesn't just hand him a vague blessing. He lays out a highly specific legal and theological framework.
Very specific. The sources list 9 distinct divine commitments.
Yeah, looking at Velazquez's breakdown, I see these promises fall into a few distinct categories. First, there are promises about security giving Israel rest from their enemies and making David's name great.
Which addresses the immediate geopolitical concern.
Right, but then it heavily shifts into generational guarantees. God promises to raise up his offspring, establish the kingdom, and build a house for his name.
It follows the pattern of ancient suzerain vassal treaties, but it subverts them in a way. Uniquely, God confirms that this future son will be the one to actually build the physical temple.
Which we know historically ends up being King Solomon. But then the language takes a turn that just shatters any normal historical context.
Yeah.
God starts throwing around the word forever.
Yes.
He says he will establish the throne of that kingdom forever, and that David's house and kingdom will be made sure forever. He even mentions this intimate father and son relationship and that his steadfast love will remain.
That word forever is the theological thunderclap of the entire passage.
A thunderclap.
Exactly. Up until that point, you could read Nathan's oracle as a very generous but standard dynastic promise. Every king wants their bloodline to endure.
Sure, they all want legacy.
But inserting the concept of eternity moves this out of the realm of ancient Near Eastern politics and into the realm of eschatology. It points to ultimate end-of-days hope.
Because no human dynasty lasts forever.
Right. Regimes fall, empires crumble, bloodlines fade. To guarantee a throne forever requires a king and a kingdom that cannot be destroyed by time, decay, or human failure.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second. If I'm looking at this as a legal document, it sounds incredibly reckless on God's part.
How so?
Well, God is promising an eternal throne, a kingdom forever, and saying his loyal love will never depart from this family. Doesn't that just give David's descendants a massive blank check?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Like, they have diplomatic immunity from the creator of the universe. Couldn't they commit atrocities, abuse their citizens, worship other gods, and just wave this covenant around saying, hey, you promised forever?
It does seem like a dangerous loophole.
Right. Where is the accountability? How can a holy God tie his reputation so permanently to a flawed human family?
That is the exact tension the biblical authors wrestled with, and it's addressed directly in the text of 2 Samuel 7.14 and 15. The paper draws a vital, razor-sharp distinction here.
Let's hear it.
This covenant is unilateral in its final promise, but it is deeply moral in its historical administration.
Unilateral promise versus moral administration. Let's break that down for the listener.
So, unilateral means God is swearing an oath based entirely on his own character. He guarantees the final, ultimate outcome, the eternal throne, regardless of human behavior. The ultimate promise will not fail.
Okay, so the end goal is locked in.
Yes. However, the administration of that promise, how it plays out generation by generation in real-time history, is highly conditional upon the obedience of the individual kings.
Ah, so there are immediate consequences.
Exactly. God explicitly warns David, when he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men.
The rod men, meaning using other human nations to punish them.
Right. God promises to use political adversaries, military defeats, and internal strife to discipline the Davidic kings when they fall into injustice or idolatry. They are held to a terrifyingly high standard.
But the crucial distinction comes next, right?
Yes. God says that even in the midst of severe discipline, his hesed will not depart from them.
Hesed. That is one of those Hebrew words that is almost impossible to translate with just one English word, isn't it?
It really is. It is the bedrock concept of the Old Testament. It encompasses steadfast love, loyal covenant-keeping, and this stubborn mercy.
Stubborn mercy. I like that.
And God is explicitly contrasting his hesed toward David with how he treated Saul. When Saul rebelled, God removed the kingship from his family entirely. The line of Saul was finished.
Completely cut off.
But with David, God is making a different kind of commitment. The covenant remains sure, even when the individual kings are unfaithful. God promises to judge sin within the line, but he will remain faithful to the line.
Okay, so to use an analogy, it's the difference between a muddied window and a shattered window.
Okay, walk me through that.
If the Davidic king sins, the window gets covered in mud. The light of God's blessing can't shine through to the people, and they suffer in the darkness. God will scrub that window raw to clean it. That's the discipline. But he promises he will never shatter the window and remove the frame entirely like he did with Saul. The underlying structure remains intact.
That perfectly captures the dynamic. The royal line only survives the devastating judgments of history because the bedrock promise of God is holding up the floorboards.
That leads us right into the specific vocabulary God uses to describe the structure. Velazquez points out 3 specific royal nouns that make up the redemptive architecture of this covenant.
House, throne, and kingdom.
Right. House, throne, and kingdom. And these aren't just poetic flourishes, are they?
No, they are precise, loaded theological terms. The house is the dynasty, sure, but more than that, it becomes the designated vehicle for the messianic promise.
Meaning what exactly?
It means that whenever God is going to act decisively to rescue humanity, he is going to do it through the DNA of this specific family.
Wow. Okay, and the throne.
The throne represents the legitimate divine right to rule. It means the authority isn't stolen or usurped. It is authorized by heaven.
And the kingdom.
The kingdom is the actual realm, the exercise of that governance over a people and a territory.
When you put those 3 together, you arrive at a concept that the infographic highlights heavily: derivative authority. The idea that God's kingdom is mediated, not diminished, through a human king.
And this is where Israel's political theology drastically diverges from their neighbors.
How so?
Well, in Egypt, Pharaoh was considered a literal god. In Babylon, the king was the source of law. But in Israel, the king is never ultimate. He is always a representative under God. He does not surrender God's sovereignty. He channels it.
So the king in Israel isn't the CEO. He is middle management.
Exactly.
He has real tangible power over the citizens, but that power is entirely derived from the actual owner of the company. He didn't found it, he doesn't own the equity, and the moment he forgets that and tries to act like the CEO, the entire corporate structure collapses.
Which is exactly why the book of Deuteronomy, written long before David, laid out specific rules for future kings.
Oh, right, the restrictions on the king.
Deuteronomy 17 commands that a king must not amass wealth or build a massive standing army of horses. Instead, the very first thing he is required to do upon taking the throne is to sit down and hand copy the law of God.
He has to literally transcribe the boss's rulebook.
Yes, to keep him humble and to remind him daily that he is subject to a higher law. When the king governs according to that law, he mediates God's righteous rule. But if he acts autonomously, he becomes an idolater.
Seeing how this works makes it easier to understand how the Davidic Covenant fits into the larger puzzle of the Bible. It's like a cascading architecture of covenants.
It really is a progression.
You start with the Abrahamic covenant, where God promises a family, a land, and universal blessing. Then, centuries later, the Mosaic covenant gives that family a constitution, the law, so they know how to form a holy nation.
And then the Davidic covenant drops in as the royal mediation. In answer to the practical question, who will lead the people to obey the Mosaic law so they can actually inherit the Abrahamic blessing?
The Davidic king is the linchpin.
Exactly. And this all sets the stage for the new covenant prophesied later, which promises the internal transformation of the human heart so the people can actually follow the king. They aren't competing covenants, they are interlocking building blocks.
This is where the story gets incredibly dark. Because if we turn the page from 2 Samuel 7 and read the actual historical accounts in the books of Kings and Chronicles, this beautiful cascading architecture just collapses almost immediately.
It really does. The historical wreckage is staggering.
God makes this cosmic promise, and the human kings immediately prove they cannot carry the weight of it.
And it starts with David himself.
Right. The exact same guy who sat in humble awe before God ends up committing adultery with Bathsheba and orchestrating the murder of her husband to cover his tracks. It's a catastrophic abuse of power.
And his son Solomon, the one who actually builds the physical temple and experiences this golden age of peace, ends his reign in deep compromise.
He marries hundreds of foreign wives for political alliances, right?
Yes, and worse, he builds shrines to their gods right across the valley from the temple of Yahweh. The architectural theology there is devastating.
Because the physical temple in Jerusalem is supposed to be the singular emblem of God's presence, and Solomon just clutters the landscape with rival deities.
Exactly. And because of this, the consequences are immediate. After Solomon dies, the kingdom violently fractures in two.
You get the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And from that point on, it is just a rogues gallery of corrupt leadership.
It's a downward spiral.
The kings in the north are universally terrible, setting up golden calves. The kings in the south, David's actual descendants, have a few reformers, but mostly they are embroiled in idolatry, disastrous foreign policy, and rampant injustice against their own poor.
And this downward spiral continues for centuries until God's promised discipline, the rod of men, arrives in full force. The Assyrian Empire obliterates the northern kingdom. And then, in 586 BC, the unthinkable happens to the south. The Babylonian army breaches the walls of Jerusalem.
This is the exile.
Yes. They burn Solomon's magnificent temple to the ground. They destroy the cedar palace. They capture the Davidic king, slaughter his sons in front of him, blind him, and drag him in bronze shackles to Babylon, along with the rest of the population.
I want the listener to really sit in the ashes of that moment. Try to imagine the psychological terror and theological crisis of 586 BC. You grew up singing songs about an ironclad, unconditional, forever promise to David's family.
You believed Jerusalem was invincible because God's temple was there.
And now you are sitting as a refugee by a river in Babylon. The city is gone. The throne is empty. The king is rotting in a dungeon. How on earth do you process that? Did they just assume God lied?
Yeah.
Or that the covenant was completely
It
canceled?
was an existential crisis of faith, and we don't have to guess how they felt because they documented their trauma in the Psalms.
The Psalms act as covenant commentary here, right?
Absolutely. If you want to understand the emotional landscape of the Davidic Covenant, the Psalms are the ultimate commentary. Early on, you have beautiful aspirational texts like Psalm 2 and Psalm 72, which pray for a king who will defend the cause of the poor, crush the oppressor, and bring universal peace.
That was the ideal, the hope.
But then you get to Psalm 89.
Yeah, let's talk about Psalm 89.
It is arguably the most poignant, agonizing text in the Hebrew Bible regarding this covenant. It begins by recounting the promises of 2 Samuel 7 almost verbatim. It celebrates God's eternal faithfulness, but halfway through, the poetry violently ruptures.
It just shifts entirely.
The author looks at the smoking ruins of Jerusalem and cries out to God, essentially accusing him of breaking the covenant. He says, "You have renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust. You have breached all his walls."
He is literally holding God's own contract up to the sky and screaming, "You broke this."
It is absolute desolation. It's the raw sound of a worldview collapsing. But Velazquez's analysis provides a brilliant insight here. This agonizing tension is not a mistake in the biblical narrative.
It's intentional.
It is entirely necessary. The historical failure of the human kings has what he calls pedagogical power.
Pedagogical power, meaning it was designed to teach them a lesson they couldn't learn any other way.
Exactly. History served as a brutal, centuries-long object lesson. If the monarchy had just been pretty good, the kings were generally decent administrators, the people would have settled for a mediocre earthly utopia.
They would have placed their ultimate hope in a human political structure.
Right. By exposing the profound corruption and inability of every single earthly son of David, God intensified the longing. The disappointment became the engine for a greater hope.
The failures weren't just detours. They proved that the middle management was utterly insufficient. The failure in the middle management proved that humanity needed the CEO to step in directly.
That is precisely it. The historical wreckage proved that no fallen human being could ever carry the weight of an eternal, perfectly righteous throne. The covenant was never meant to terminate on a regular human king.
The gap between the promise of a perfect king and the reality of their corrupt kings forced them to look forward to an ultimate, divine Son of David.
This maps perfectly onto the timeline in our infographic. It traces the grand narrative. It shows how the Davidic Covenant isn't just a quirk of Israeli history, it's the fulcrum of human destiny.
Walk us through that timeline.
You start in eternity and creation, where humanity is made in the image of God to exercise righteous dominion over the earth. We were designed for royalty.
But then comes the fall.
Yeah.
Power is corrupted. We trade stewardship for exploitation.
Right, and fallen humanity cannot self-correct its own corrupt power structures, so God initiates the covenants to restore what was lost. The Davidic Covenant establishes the framework for righteous rule. But then comes the exile, where the promise is deferred.
Deferred, not annulled. It goes underground, and then the people eventually return from Babylon. But it's not the same, is it?
Not at all. They rebuild a much smaller temple. They don't have a Davidic king on the throne. They spend the next 400 years being conquered and governed by the Persians, then the Greeks, and finally the iron fist of the Roman Empire.
So by the first century, the tension is at a fever pitch.
The messianic expectation in the first century was palpable. They were desperately waiting for the forever king to arrive, shatter the Roman occupation, and restore the glory of David's empire.
Which brings us to the most massive plot twist in the narrative, because the historical figure who finally steps onto the stage to fundamentally change the trajectory, who claims this inheritance, does not look or act anything like what they expected.
No, he doesn't. But the New Testament writers are absolutely unapologetic about who he is.
The climactic fulfillment.
Yes. The very first sentence of the Gospel of Matthew explicitly kicks off with this claim. It reads, "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David." It is an explosive political and theological claim right out of the gate.
And it's not just Matthew. In the Gospel of Luke, when the angel Gabriel appears to a young Jewish girl named Mary, he doesn't just say she's going to have a profoundly special child.
He weaponizes the exact vocabulary of 2 Samuel 7.
Right. He tells her, "The Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Throne, house, kingdom forever. It's all right there.
The sources detail 4 profound ways that Jesus answers the Davidic promise, fulfilling it in ways no one could have anticipated.
Let's go through them. What's the first one?
First, he fulfills it physically and historically. By his genealogy and incarnation, he is truly David's son. The promise of salvation remains tethered to the physical earth in real human flesh.
So it's not just some floating spiritual concept.
No, it's rooted in history. Second, he is the perfectly righteous king that David never was. David was deeply flawed. Jesus is the sinless embodiment of covenant faithfulness. He doesn't just read the law, he embodies the law perfectly.
The mud is completely wiped off the window.
Exactly. Third, and this is how he solves the ultimate problem of human dynasties, he reigns forever through his resurrection and exaltation.
That is such a crucial point, because death is the ultimate disruptor of any human institution. Even if you get a great king, he eventually dies, and you roll the dice on his kid.
Right. Death makes forever impossible for mortals. But by taking on human flesh, dying, and then conquering death itself through the resurrection, Jesus secures immortality. His reign literally has no end. The forever clause is finally achieved.
That is incredible to think about. And the fourth way?
Fourth, because he is a cosmic king, he gathers people from every nation, expanding the kingdom universally. This fulfills the ancient promise to Abraham.
Looking at the infographic, there's a fascinating chart contrasting the historical human kings with Jesus, the promised king. And the contrast isn't just about who is better. It's a complete clash of paradigms.
How do you mean?
Well, the human kings ruled through the mechanics of earthly power, military force, heavy taxation, fragile alliances, politics, compromise. They were sinful, and their kingdoms were divided.
Whereas Jesus exercises rule through truth, justice, and ultimately self-sacrificial love on a cross, he is sinless, and his kingdom is unshakable.
The human thrones ended in judgment and the exile of the people. They were unable to save their people. Jesus' throne is established forever, vindicated by God, and it results in saving his people completely.
He doesn't just continue the Davidic line, he assumes it and completely transforms it.
Okay, this is a staggering amount of ancient history and deep theology. But I want to bring this directly into the present moment for the listener, because we've established the massive scope of this covenant. But how does a 3,000-year-old royal decree, fulfilled by a first-century rabbi, actually impact the way you, the person listening to this right now, live your life, work, and hope today?
Because theology that doesn't touch the ground of our daily lives is just intellectual trivia. Our source material is highly intentional about drawing out the practical, lived implications of this covenant.
So where do we start?
To do that effectively, we first have to dismantle a few very dangerous misunderstandings that a lot of people subconsciously carry around.
Let's do some rapid-fire myth-busting then, because there are a few common ones. For instance, was the covenant actually fulfilled by Solomon?
No, only partially. His sin and the subsequent division of the kingdom prove that the true fulfillment was future.
Okay, what about this one? Did Israel break the covenant so badly that it was canceled?
No. They brought judgment on themselves, yes, but God's promise to the line of David remained sure. The foundation held.
All right, here's a big one. Is Jesus merely a spiritual king who just rules quietly in our hearts, but has no real authority over the physical, actual world?
Absolutely not. That's a huge misunderstanding. It primarily comes from a fusion of later philosophical ideas that viewed the physical world as inherently dirty or secondary to the spiritual realm.
Right, which leads to an escapist theology. People start to believe that Jesus only cares about saving souls for an ethereal heaven, and that the physical world is just a sinking ship we are waiting to evacuate.
And that completely castrates the promise. God didn't promise David a metaphor. He promised a real kingdom.
So his kingship is cosmic and real over all creation.
Yes. Jesus' kingship is certainly spiritual, but it is not merely private or inward. By resurrecting in a physical body, Jesus laid claim to the material universe. He claims ultimate authority over all of creation, all of history, every nation, and every square inch of reality.
So to domesticate him into just a personal savior who minds his own business is to completely misread the covenant. That brings us to the opposite extreme, which is arguably more prevalent today. The belief that earthly politics can somehow serve as the fulfillment of the Davidic Covenant. The idea that if we just get the right people in power, pass the right laws, or build the right system, we can finally usher in justice and peace.
The author of the paper makes this point with piercing clarity. The Davidic Covenant absolutely exposes and shatters the illusion of political utopianism.
Let's really drill down on this because this is wildly relevant for anyone listening, regardless of where they live or what political system they operate under. The biblical text seems perfectly neutral on the mechanics of human government, but incredibly firm on its limitations.
Earthly politics are not inherently evil. In a fallen world, government is necessary to maintain basic order, suppress violence, and protect the vulnerable. You should care about it. It can serve justice in limited ways. But the history of the Davidic kings proves that no political order, no ideology, and absolutely no human leader can replace the reign of Christ. They cannot change the human heart. They cannot eradicate systemic sin. And they certainly cannot defeat death.
Earthly power always falls short of this messianic hope. So if you find yourself attaching your ultimate hope or your deepest despair to a 4-year election cycle, a political movement, or a charismatic leader, you are setting yourself up for the exact same agonizing pedagogical disappointment that Israel experienced when Jerusalem fell.
You are building a house on sand. The Davidic Covenant corrects every messianic illusion we try to attach to human power. And paradoxically, it actually frees us.
Frees us how?
It frees you to participate in your local and national politics responsibly and soberly without turning it into a frantic religion, because you already know who permanently holds the eternal throne.
That is incredibly liberating. So if we aren't supposed to find ultimate hope in the present political reality, how do we live in the meantime? Philetus uses a pastoral phrase I love. He talks about living in the gap.
Yes, we live in the tension between the already and the not yet. The promise was inaugurated at Jesus' first coming, but it will not be fully consummated until he returns to establish the new creation. Just like David and the Israelites lived in the gap between the promise and its fulfillment, you might feel like you are in a season of waiting.
It's like knowing you have an inheritance locked in a trust. You have the legal paperwork. You know the assets are real and they belong to you. But you can't fully access the capital yet.
Exactly. The wait might be agonizingly long.
You might have to endure years of really hard, lean days where it feels like you are scraping by, dealing with illness, relational brokenness, or financial stress. But the vault itself, the trust, it is completely secure. Your circumstances don't dictate the reality of the promise.
That analogy captures the dual posture we are called to hold: supreme confidence and profound patience.
Confidence because God keeps promises.
Right. And patience because fulfillment often comes through long waiting and purification, as we saw in Israel's history.
And there's a very direct application here for anyone who exercises authority in their own life. Whether you are a corporate executive, a middle manager, a teacher, a community leader, or a parent.
It goes back to that concept of derivative authority we discussed. If you hold any measure of power over other human beings, the lesson of the Davidic monarchy is a stern warning. Authority is a temporary trust placed in your hands by God, under God's word.
It's not a platform for self.
Never. Leaders in God's economy are called to shepherd, not dominate. They are called to serve and to leverage their power for the flourishing of those under them, exactly as the ultimate son of David did. If you use your position to exploit or crush people, you are mimicking the fall, not the covenant.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's pull all these threads together into a final synthesis. We started with an ancient king sitting in a luxurious cedar palace wanting to build a temple for a tent-dwelling God.
And God completely reversed the dynamic, promising an eternal dynasty instead.
We examined how that promise demanded moral accountability, and how the brutal reality of human history proved that no mere mortal could ever carry the weight of an eternal throne.
We looked at the profound theological trauma of the exile, the raw agony expressed in the Psalms, and how that historical disappointment functioned as a crucible, forging a desperate hope for a true divine Messiah.
And we saw how Jesus stepped into history, claiming that exact lineage, conquering death itself to reign forever, and proving that God's promises are utterly unbreakable. The Davidic Covenant is God's declaration that his kingdom will not fail.
The infographic leaves us with a stunning quote from the prophet Isaiah looking forward to this Messiah. It says, "Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore."
The throne is not empty. The king is not absent.
The covenant hasn't failed. It simply outgrew the limitations of ancient politics and stepped into its fullest reality in Christ.
We have covered a massive expanse of history and theology today, and I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. We spent a lot of time discussing how humanity lost its righteous dominion at the fall, and how the Davidic Covenant, ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, is God's mechanism for restoring that authority to human beings.
If you are part of the church, the community gathered under Christ's throne, you are part of that restoration project.
So here is the question for you to explore on your own. What does it actually mean for you to exercise derivative authority in your own life today? Think about your home, your workplace, or your community. How are you reflecting the righteous, servant-hearted rule of the ultimate king while we wait for the new creation?
It's a heavy question.
It really is. If you are part of this eternal kingdom, how does that fundamentally change the way you wield whatever small amount of power you hold right now? Because if the king has truly come, and if his reign is forever, then the way we treat each other today should look like a preview of eternity.